Chapter 6. Painting the Emerald Sky. By the time Painting the Sky and Emerald Sky came into being, Richard and Kelly had lived inside their sound long enough to know its contours. The sturdy floorboards, the doorways that opened into new rooms, the windows that looked out onto places they hadn't visited yet. What they didn't know was just how far that sound could reach. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after years of motion. After tours and festivals, interviews and deadlines, there are days when the world goes still long enough for you to hear where you are, not just where you've been. That's where both of them found themselves at the start of the sessions that would shape their latest work. Richard was back in Oakland more often now, older, but no less attuned to the city's pulse. He'd walk familiar blocks and hear echoes of his younger self in every passing car stereo, in every backyard party snare drum. The groove that raised him hadn't gone anywhere, it had just grown new layers of history. Kelly, when she wasn't in transit, spent stretches of time in quieter corners again, sometimes back in Oregon, sometimes tucked into rented cabins along the Northern California coast. She let the weather talk to her. Rain on windows, foghorns at night, wind slipping through evergreens. The drift that formed her hadn't gone anywhere either, it had deepened. When they reassembled in the studio, an unassuming room with good wood, good mics, and a window that looked out over a tangle of trees, they carried all of that with them. The road, the roots, the questions they'd wrestled with in who I've become, the answers they'd half found in essence of us. They didn't sit down and say, let's make our most immersive songs yet. They just knew that whatever came next had to be honest about where they stood. Two artists who had traveled through cycles of ages, had become rooted in each other's worlds, and still felt awe at what happened when their sounds met. Painting the Sky began with a simple image. It feels, Kelly said one afternoon, fingers resting on the keys, like we've been learning how to mix color this whole time. And now we finally have the whole palette. Richard sat on a studio couch, guitar in his lap, a small pedal board on the floor at his feet. You mean like, instead of just picking blue or gold, we can finally do the fade between them? Exactly, she nodded. Like we're not just standing under the sky anymore. We're participating. He liked that. Participating in the sky. Technically, the track started like so many of theirs did, with a groove. Richard found a mid-tempo pocket that felt both relaxed and propulsive, a rhythm that could lift without rushing. The chords he laid over it had that trademark blend, soulful and clear, but with unexpected extensions that opened small windows into something more expansive. Kelly responded not with a wash this time, but with small, deliberate strokes. A Wurlitzer-style electric piano chiming in sync with his chords. A soft pad underneath that rose and fell, like breath. She wanted the song to feel like an unfolding sky at dusk. Layers of color appearing gradually, not all at once. They both knew this song was a duet from the first pass. Feels like we should both be talking on this one, Richard said, picking out a melodic fragment that could be a vocal line. Not just you on the lead and me in the back, or the other way around. Yeah, Kelly agreed. Two voices painting the same thing from different angles. Lyrically, Painting the Sky became their clearest statement about collaboration. The verses traced their separate vantage points. Richard's lines looked outward, streets, stages, crowds, the tangible world you can touch and walk on. Kelly's verses looked upward and inward, changing light, shifting moods, the way a song can tint how you remember a day. The chorus brought them together. We've been painting the sky with our two shades of light. Yours the rhythm of the sunrise, mine the echo of the night. They sang it in unison first, then let their harmonies split, his lower, earthbound tone anchoring the bottom, her clear, spacious voice stretching at the top. The blend felt like biography, Oakland and Eugene, Pulse and Haze, finally meeting not as contrast, but as complement. In the arrangement, they made intentional choices about immersion. The drums sat wide in the stereo field, a little room reverb giving the impression that the kit was in the same room with the listener, not on some distant stage. The bass was round and supportive, almost like a second heartbeat under the track. Around that, they painted. Richard used a single, tasteful modulation pedal to add a subtle shimmer to certain chords, like light catching on the edge of a cloud. Kelly wove in small, high piano notes that sparkled then vanished, stars winking in and out as the sky darkened. Midway through, they built a section that felt almost weightless. The groove stayed, but everything else thinned. Just a tremolo guitar pulsing like a distant lighthouse, and Kelly's voice, almost a whisper, asking, "If the colors fade, will we still remember how this felt?" When the full arrangement rushed back in after that, there was a lift that made even them catch their breath on playback. The sky painted anew, brighter for having briefly gone dim. They knew, tracking that song, that they'd reached a new height, not of technical complexity, but of clarity. It sounded like everything they'd been chasing, finally expressed without strain. If painting the sky was about the act of making together, Emerald Sky was about the place that making had carried them to. The title came from a drive. After a run of shows, they'd taken a day off and headed north, following the coastline until the road rose high above the ocean. It was late afternoon, and the cloudy light did something strange to the color of the water and the hills. Muted greens and blues smeared together into a single luminous shade. "It looks like the sky fell into the earth," Kelly said, forehead against the window. "Or the earth rose up to meet it," Richard replied. Emerald sky. The phrase lingered in both of them. Back in the studio, they returned to it. "I think this one starts in the sky and ends in the soil," Richard said, fingers testing low, droning notes on the guitar. He wanted the track to feel enveloping from the first second, like stepping into a landscape, rather than listening to a song. Kelly dialed in a pad that didn't sound like any specific instrument, somewhere between synth and strings, a wide, glassy tone with a gentle chorus effect. When she held a single chord, it seemed to expand beyond the speakers. They made a choice for Emerald Sky that surprised even them at first. The groove would come late. The track opened with pure atmosphere, no drums, no clear rhythm, just layers of sustained notes and a distant violin line that sounded like a horizon humming. Over that, a few drops of electric guitar, harmonics that rang like small bells, a slow slide up the neck that felt like dawn. Then, after what felt like a long inhale, the beat entered. Not with a crash, but with a soft, syncopated pattern that grew from under the pads. A kick drum pulsing on the low end, a snare hiding slightly behind the beat, hi-hats whispering in 16th notes. The effect was that of finding your footing on a soft forest floor after floating for a while. This was psychedelic soul stretched to its widest boundaries. The soul lived in the chord movement, progressions that nodded toward classic ballads, cadences that rewarded you with a sense of release when they finally landed. The psychedelia lived in the sense of suspension between those landings, in the way certain sounds seemed to hang in the air a beat or two longer than physics should allow. Vocally, they treated Emerald Sky less like a typical duet and more like a conversation in layers. Richard took the first line alone, his voice warm and weathered. "I used to walk with my eyes on the ground, counting cracks in the concrete below." You could hear Oakland in that image, the city sidewalks that had shaped his sense of time. Kelly responded not with a full verse, but with interwoven phrases, sometimes behind him, sometimes just ahead, echoes and anticipations. "I used to float with my head in the clouds, chasing shapes that the wind wouldn't hold." You could hear Eugene there, the dreamscapes and drifting thoughts. In the chorus, they came together fully. "Now the earth and sky are the same shade of green, where your rhythm meets my dreaming in between." They sang it like a mantra, voices overlapping and separating, sometimes singing the same words at different moments, as if the line itself was a cycle they were walking through, from opposite directions. To heighten the transportive quality, they wove in subtle field recordings, a faint rustle of leaves, nearly imperceptible, the murmur of distant traffic filtered until it just felt like wind, a single soft chime that recurred at key transitions, like a guidepost. On good speakers or headphones, Emerald Sky didn't feel like it was just in front of you. It felt like it was around you. That was deliberate. "We've always wanted the songs to be places people could step into," Kelly said during those sessions. "This time, I want them to feel like you're walking around in them. And if we're lucky," Richard added, "maybe they feel familiar and new at the same time, like coming home to a place you haven't been before." As they worked, they were more aware than ever of the road behind them. They could hear Heart of the Village humming in Richard's left hand whenever he dug a little deeper into a chord, the Oakland heartbeat still present in even the most floating tracks. They could hear Under the Night Sky in Kelly's use of space, in the way she wasn't afraid to let a whole bar go by with nothing but air and decay. They could trace their evolution from the first A New World jam in the vineyard, through the cycles and roots, essence and self-questioning, all the way into this new luminous territory. The immersive, transportive nature of their latest work wasn't a departure. It was an accumulation. Live, the new songs took on a different kind of power. At festivals, when they played Painting the Sky toward the end of a set, it often felt like a summation, both of the night and of their collaboration. The crowd, warmed up and open, moved not just to the beat, but to the rise and fall of their harmonies, the way their voices seemed to color the air. On a good night, you could see it happen. A field of people lit by stage wash and twilight, singing about painting the sky with two shades of light, bodies swaying in unison, even as each person carried their own memories, their own reasons for being there. In more intimate venues, Emerald Sky became an experience. Lights went low. Visual projections, abstract, flowing greens and blues, shifting slowly like northern lights, spilled over the stage and the walls. Richard's first notes hung in the room like questions. Kelly's pads turned the space into a kind of sonic fog. By the time the beat came in, the crowd was already inside it. Some nights, people closed their eyes and stayed still, letting the sound move around them. Other nights, couples leaned into each other, foreheads touching, as if the song had carved out a private little clearing for them in the middle of a crowd. Afterward, people would come up to the merch table or send messages online, trying to put the feeling into words. It felt like I left and came back, someone wrote about Emerald Sky, like I was somewhere else for a while, but it still felt like me. I don't dance, another person said, laughing nervously after a show, but whatever that was at the end of Painting the Sky, my body just moved. Thank you for that. For Richard and Kelly, those responses meant more than numbers or charts. They spoke to what had quietly become their purpose, to make music that functioned as a kind of shared space, accessible yet strange, grounded yet elevated, familiar enough to step into without fear. As talk of legacy began to creep into interviews, they both resisted the finality of the word. They didn't feel done, not by a long shot. But they could see in the arc of their work a pattern that might outlast them. There were kids at their shows now, young musicians studying their arrangements, asking about chord voicings, about how to make a guitar sit like that in a mix, how to make a vocal sound like it's inside the room instead of on top of it. Richard would talk about pocket and patience, play it 1,000 times until it feels like walking, then record it. Kelly would talk about listening and restraint. Don't fill every space. Let the reverb live. Let the listener finish a thought with you. They both spoke often about collaboration, not as a buzzword, but as a practice. People ask how we blend our styles, Richard would say. The real answer is, we don't always, not at first. We crash them into each other, then listen for what survives. Kelly would add, you have to be willing to let go of some of your favorite ideas, not because they're bad, but because they don't serve the shared thing. The shared thing is the point. Looking ahead, they didn't have a rigid 5-year plan. They had a loose living list of places they wanted to take the sound. More orchestral explorations with strings and horns, stripped down, almost acoustic versions of their heaviest songs, collaborations with younger artists from Oakland and Eugene, folding new perspectives into the groove and the haze. They talked about scoring a film together, a story that moved between city and forest, between day and night. They imagined immersive shows where the line between concert and installation blurred completely, where people could walk through rooms that responded sonically to their movement, the way their songs had always responded to movement on a dance floor or in a festival field. Whatever form it took, they knew one thing: the music would remain a conversation. Between Richard and Kelly, yes, between groove and atmosphere, but also between past and future, between individual and collective, between listener and sound. On a quiet evening, back in a space not so different from that first borrowed room above a cafe, they sat together listening to the final masters of Painting the Sky and Emerald Sky. Outside, dusk deepened. The trees beyond the window were black cutouts against a fading, indeterminate color, somewhere between green and blue, like the whole world had agreed on an in-between. Richard turned the volume up just a shade. Kelly closed her eyes. They heard everything. The Oakland pulse that had taught a boy how to hold a room in time. The Eugene drift that had taught a girl how to turn air into melody. The vineyard session where those instincts met. The years of work that shaped that meeting into something durable. The imperfections were there too. Tiny timing variances, breaths, the human quiver at the edge of a long note. They left them in. Those were the proof that this wasn't a machine, but a conversation between two people who had chosen again and again to build something together rather than apart. When the last echo of Emerald Sky faded, the room was very still. "You hear it?" Richard asked softly. "What?" Kelly replied, even though she did. "The us," he said. She smiled, not opening her eyes. "Yeah, I hear it." In that moment, their legacy didn't feel like a list of songs or shows. It felt like a way of working, a way of listening, a demonstration that some music really is meant to be made together, and that when it is, it can take you places neither voice could have reached alone. Outside, the sky darkened into full night, the last trace of color sinking into the horizon. Inside, there was a lingering sense that somewhere, in the space between earth and heaven, a new shade had been added, one painted in groove and haze, in strings and keys, in two voices learning, over and over, how to find each other in the sound. The sky, once something they only stood beneath, had become something they helped to color. And as long as they could still hear that shared tone, grounded, drifting, distinct yet woven, they knew the collaboration had more worlds left to open, more emerald skies left to find.